On March 1st, 2010, billionaire CEO of Japan's largest online retailer, Hiroshi Mikitani, stepped up on a podium to address 7,000 of his Japanese employees in the room, with some 3,000 overseas employees listening in. On that day, his announcement would change the course of his company forever. From this day forward, he said, our company is changing its working language from Japanese to English, and employees had 2 years to clear a language proficiency test or face demotion. For Mikitani, a common language was critical for the future of his company. His company had reached almost 90% market share dominance in Japan, and the only way to grow was to accelerate his globalization efforts. They'd already entered some foreign markets, but now he aspired to have presence everywhere. When I first heard about this language mandate, I wanted to know how the workforce would fare. How will the Japanese employees who lived and worked their entire lives in Japan fare in this situation? And what happens to the native English-speaking Americans? Is this good news for them? What about employees in places like France and Germany and Taiwan and Brazil? Good or bad news? Here you have Hiroshi Mikitani, who mandated one single language for people from different nationalities, from different cultures, and different native languages. Why? To integrate and expand his operations globally, he needed to make sure that people could connect and collaborate successfully with those whose languages and cultures were different from their own. Isn't that something we all want? To be able to understand and be easily understood by those who are different from us? And in the global workplace, don't we want to have cross-border interactions without any barriers? But language, especially a non-native language, can knock us on our heels. Just imagine if all of you walked into your organizations tomorrow morning and learned that your company had changed its working language to one you barely knew, like Spanish or Mandarin. How do you work? How do you communicate? How do you express your hard-earned competence? How do you express yourself? How do you express your culture? And if you're a native speaker of that language, does this mean that you now have to engage and navigate more and more unfamiliar cultures? I had the rare privilege and opportunity to study what happened at Rakuten soon after this big announcement for 5 consecutive years. I talked to over 650 employees across 8 country locations. I collected over 20,000 pages of archival data. I collected over 3,000 surveys at multiple times. I was deeply immersed in the company during this period, and Mikitani granted me unprecedented and unconditional visibility into his company, so I could see everything as it was unfolding. And even as someone who had spent 15 years looking at the effects of globalization on companies and employees across many firms, many industries, and many, many countries, and as someone who speaks other languages and is sensitive to the challenges of learning, acquiring, and using new ones, my in-depth study Rakuten would overturn my long-held assumptions about the relationship between language and culture. My assumption, influenced by scholars, was that language and culture were unequivocally and necessarily bound to each other. The first thing I discovered is that language and culture are not inseparable. In fact, I learned that people could be much more connected with each other if they treated language and culture separately. Today, approximately 60% of global companies have a common language, usually English, to standardize and facilitate global work. Linguists believe that 1 in 4 people in the world speaks a useful level of English. 300 million Chinese nationals are actively studying English today. And in fact, there are more English speakers in China than the United States of America. It's true. It's true. And 2/3 of Europeans cite English as the most important skill that they want their children to learn. And because of our interconnected world, English is today the fastest spreading language in human history. Culture is defined as the customs, the rituals, the values, the norms, the attitudes of any given nation. And the belief is that the way we manage culture and cultural differences is by discerning and deciphering each other's cultural rituals and codes. And these beliefs are at odds with the proliferation of English and cultures all around the world and the ways in which we've understood them. We've all heard them, just like I did. Language and culture are inextricably tied. Language is the expression of people's cultures, communities, and nations. And the way to understand ourselves is by understanding the structures of each language. And so the biggest fear about taking up a common language is that we would water down cultures or even kill cultures, commit violence against cultures. And so here's what I wanted to know. What happens if we treated a common language like English and culture as separable? I learned 3 things. If you can speak a common language, you have the potential of reaching everyone. That a common language can be an unbiased means of communicating any culture, and that you can mix languages and cultures productively. I reached these conclusions in my deep, immersive time of the company, Rakuten, and looking at the workforce over time. Let me tell you a little bit about what happened. The Japanese employees struggled tremendously in the beginning. They experienced language shock. They endured anxiety. They worked harder and longer than ever before. But within 2 years, things changed. They began to spread their corporate cultural practices in new and significant ways to all of their subsidiaries. In fact, English became the conduit for them to share their Japanese culture within the company and outside the company. The Americans were euphoric in the beginning. I mean, they would say things to me like, "I've got that box checked." Or, "Woohoo, thank God he picked my language." Or, "Whew, I don't have to do anything here." But within 2 years, things changed. Onslaught of new expectations, new corporate cultural demands. Suddenly, they experienced culture shock, even though they'd been part of the company for many years. The corporate culture of the company was stuck at the headquarters, and now it was diffusing to them in meaningful ways. What about the employees who were neither Japanese or American? Here I'm talking about the employees from in places like Latin America and Europe and parts of Asia. I thought this would be the double jeopardy group. And indeed, they had to climb a steep linguistic and cultural curve. But within 2 years, things changed. This group proved to be the most open and the most flexible to taking up a new language and a new culture. This group understood that you could separate language and culture, and you could even mix language and culture in ways that allowed them to be more connected and to connect with others more. This group actually proved to be the most effective global employee over time. You know, we're talking about English today, but there have been many common languages over the centuries. Arabic and French and Greek have had their turn. This idea of decoupling language and culture is agnostic to the language in question. You know, when I first visited Rakuten, I would walk across the cafeteria and see very little diversity. In fact, I was the diversity in the room. But when I returned after this language change took hold, what I saw was stunning. It was striking. I saw a very diverse workforce breaking bread together. And instead of the conflicting cocktails of languages you would expect with the type of diversity I witnessed, everybody was speaking the same language, joined together in clarity. I don't have all the answers, but I truly believe that it's worth building on these ideas because language is everywhere. Culture is everywhere, and we're living at a time where our differences can tear us apart, where we feel small and isolated and separated and alienated and divided. But language can be our bridge to understanding, our bridge to compassion, our bridge to connection, so that we could join together in clarity. Thank you.